My name is Piero San Giorgio. I'm a Swiss best-selling author of books about survival. My first one, Survive the Economic Collapse, has been an international bestseller and teaches people how to prepare and how to cope with economic collapses, something that is happening or may happen very, very soon. And I follow up with quite a lot of books which are also translated in many languages, including English. And I'm quite happy today and very proud to tell you about my latest translation into English, a book that is very important for all of you to read, which has this barbaric title of CBRN, which is Survive Chemical, Bacteriological, Radiological, and Nuclear Events. Now, what's an event? An event can be an accident, can be a war, can be an epidemic, can be a pandemic, and this is a military terminology, CBRN. In other languages, it's called RBC. It's the opposite way. Actually, in French, it is the opposite way. And basically, it teaches you, first of all, what are these events and what are the risks of these events today in today's world. And while you may think that, for example, nuclear war, it is, and rightfully so, quite a remote possibility, and we probably and thankfully are not going to go through a nuclear war. However, there could be radiological problems linked to some industrial accidents or nuclear plants having problems, and especially if you live near one, and I know that a lot of people in the Western world, and also in China and other places, in Japan and so on, actually live near nuclear plants. The information here is quite useful for you. Same for, of course, chemical. A lot of industrial accidents like Bhopal in India in 1984 or Seveso in Italy have been quite terrible for the people living around these manufacturing chemical plants or petrochemical plants. And quite often, I know that in Houston, Texas, recently in France as well, there are regularly explosions, accidents that create clouds of toxic material, toxic chemicals that can get to the people nearby. So here also you will find information on how you detect, how to act, and eventually what kind of gear you need to have to prepare in such scenarios. And of course, right now I'm telling you this, and this book comes out as we're having this pandemic across the world. We talk a lot about biological problems in this book, biological pandemics. I've interviewed, and for every topic of these books, I've interviewed quite a lot of specialists, one of which, for example, is a worldwide specialist on pandemics, and explained, and people who've read this book in France were ready for this current pandemic. So I encourage you to be ready for the next one, and by reading this book. And these specialists tell us about, and in every one of those deals, on how the infrastructure of the economy and of the health system is ready or not on how to cope with these things, and therefore what a citizen, what a responsible citizen like you can do to actually cope in case the health system cannot work. So to tell you also something very important is that actually I co-wrote this book with someone who has this pen name of Chris Millennium, and this gentleman was a reader of my first books, and actually noticed that my first books were not dealing too much with these topics, obviously, and he is actually an expert. He was the head of the CBRN group of the elite anti-terrorist unit of the French armed forces, the JEJN, which is very famous worldwide and has a lot of expertise on these topics. And so with his technical expertise and knowledge, with his experience, he has been in war areas where officially he wasn't, he was able to give us, as we wrote this book together, the very important information on how you detect the different events that can happen, how you react, what are the attitudes you need to have. For example, if you have a chemical cloud getting near your house, you don't go to the top floor. Actually, you do go to the top floor, you don't go in the cellar. Whereas if you expect a nuclear problem, like a nuclear strike, and again, it's probably unlikely, but you never know. Well, in that case, you don't go to the top floor, you go to the down floor, and you get as deep as possible to shield yourself from radiation blast and the blast and all that. So this is just a simple example. We also give historical context of these events in history. In history, there's been chemical uses on populations by armies, by evil people like Saddam Hussein, like dictators. There's been biological plagues. There's been actually accidents from laboratories. We tell the story of a Soviet during the Cold War, a Soviet laboratory who developed biological weapons, and there have been releases of them on their own population by mistake. We also tell examples, and for every topic we give a clear and concise example of events that did happen. Radiological problems. You find radiological material in hospitals, in machines, and sometimes these machines break down. The people repair them, lose the material, and that material is potentially very deadly if you happen to touch it, or if you happen to and actually we tell the story of someone who saw something shiny on the floor, took it up, put it in his pocket, and most of his family ended up dying from radiation poisoning. And we give examples of how you avoid contact with some of those dangerous materials. And of course, the nuclear part, we give the historical context of the nuclear accidents in the world, like Fukushima, like Chernobyl, like 3 Mile Island in the US. And in the pandemics part, in the biological part, of course, we give it a lot of in-depth experience reports on people who survived and went through the Ebola crisis of 2015, the H1N1. We actually did talk already 4 years ago when this book originally came out in France about coronaviruses, the current one being a variation of some that existed already many years ago and forever, in fact. So we give example of how even the Black Plague touched and spread throughout the world and throughout Europe, and we give lists on different plagues and different effects. What were the bacteria, what were the viruses that were the cause of those plagues, and what were the vectors of those plagues across the world, so that you can have this perspective to understand when is confinement necessary, when is super good hygiene necessary, and usually it is always, but when hygiene is the way to stop, when having clean water is the must that you need to have, and so on and so on. So this book is especially useful for preppers and survivalists who already have done a lot of work and want to specifically go in depth about these topics. There's not many books on these topics at all. In fact, this is probably the only book that existed in Europe on this topic, and is one but a few of those who exist who are concise and explain everything in a few 300 pages or so. And actually, the book is illustrated. We have a lot of explanations on, for example, how does a nuclear reactor work, so that you can understand that this thing, there's a lot of myth we are busting. For example, a nuclear reactor from a nuclear power plant there's a physical impossibility that it blows up like a nuclear bomb. It is not a bomb. So there's a lot of reassuring information in here. We also explain, for example, how and where you can live, how you can calculate where to live, what is the safe distance from living from a nuclear power plant. We give examples of, I think I can find the page of the coronaviruses here, and we give a lot of tables. So we talked about this 4 years ago already, 2016, when the book originally came out. We give, of course, example here. See, we talk about the Spanish flu of 1918, which we explain quite in depth. And indeed, we talk about this kind of progressions. As you can see, you are probably right now very familiar with this kind of graphics that show the emergence of new illnesses and how you curve them by using the right approaches. And of course, in the end of the book, for example, we have a sizable part of the book which is talking about preparation. For example, the attitude. Now, if you have a nuclear blast, how you avoid according to the wind patterns, how you avoid being contaminated, how you can remove, for example, how you can remove contaminated clothes in a proper and safe way. We give a lot of explanation, and of course, as I mentioned, the historical context, including data from recently released data and historical data on how you prepare yourself, how you put and wear certain protection masks. For example, something that is very familiar now but wasn't 4 years ago is the type of protective of breathing masks that you can have, and there's all sorts of different kinds. Here we explain all sorts of material that is useful. The most important is attitude, and then of course the material systems that are available are an add-up. So yeah, we explain everything that is needed in this book, and I really encourage you to have it, read it, let me know what you think about it, because this is one of these topics that has not been covered, for especially in the survivalist and prepper communities. We always talk about how you make fire, how you defend yourself. Maybe now we start talking more and more about how you grow your own food and get self-sufficient. But these type of events have always been lagging, and probably it's because people were afraid, because they thought it was too hard to prepare. It is not too hard, and in fact, you should not be afraid of these topics, because with the right attitudes and the right knowledge, all of which is included here, you can prepare yourself to that. So let me know what you think. I'll put the link on how you can find this book. It's easy to find on Amazon, or you can order it in libraries when you will be out of confinement. But certainly this is a book that you could read right now while you have nothing better to do than staying home. Okay? So CBRN, Survive, Chemical, Bacteriological, Radiological, and Nuclear Events by Piero San Giorgio and my friend Chris Millennium. Take good care and prepare yourselves. Ciao.